Okay, so I'm going to open the floor up for general discussion on this panel, but we only have time for 5 minutes, and then we will move to the discussion of our final statement. But at first, I want to ask Minister Cartabia if you have any thoughts here. No pressure, but I want to give you the first opportunity.
Just, we are starting a general discussion. Yeah. Okay, let me just ask a question just to provoke a bit the discussion. And I would like to borrow from Max's presentation. He said, he read a quote by Rush Holt saying, facts are by themselves voiceless. And let me borrow from this quote and to restate the phrase and say, we were all taught that truth is in a way self-evident, but in our society, our feeling is that even truth, be it philosophical truth, factual truth, or whatever you want, is by itself voiceless. So my question is how to give a voice to the voiceless, how to listen to the voice of the voiceless. And since we are in the Vatican, we are talking under the crucifix, the other question is why in the Christian message, the truth is a person. It's not a fact, it's not a message, it's not an ideology, it's not, is a person. So is there any suggestion that we can take from this central message of Christianity that truth, in order to be conveyed to human beings, has become a person? What is the personal factor can tell us about the current debate that we have in the truth and post-truth era that we are living in?
Oh, I love that. Yes, because I think you point at a central issue. Truth, in order to be persuasive, has to be incarnated. And of course, from a theological perspective or from a perspective of faith, Christians can confess that truth is a person. But even at a more mundane level, the fact that truth is effective when it's contextualized, and for instance, Sima has pointed that out when she referred to the fact that certain truths have to be made relevant in the appropriate context, cultural context, in order to be received. I think that's a very important issue. And since our societies are so much fragmented in so many constituencies, so many cultures, so many, as long as we, if we don't make truth relevant to each one of those constituencies, of each one of those persons, it's very difficult for truth to, to survive or to be relevant at all in the public sphere. I think, so the idea that truth has to be incarnated or contextualized or materialized, not remaining at the abstract level, that I think that's important.
If I may, Madam Minister, the second full paragraph, the second full paragraph written July 4th, 1776 reads, "We hold these truths to be self-evident."
Can I react to this point? Because this is something that was the sentence in my first class in constitutional law, first year, always start from that. And then it continues. The sentence says that all men are created equal, and then they are given rights and so on and so forth.
By their creator.
Exactly. But this, it was clear, it was self-evident that all men were created equal. But then in American history, how long did it take to remove slavery, to remove segregation and so on and so forth? It was self-evident. But then still, you know, even in an explicit way, there, but in other countries as well, it took something else in order to be implemented, this self-evident truth.
It took a war.
It took a war.
I think it was self-evident to white men.
Can I say something? I completely agree with your question. And the solution is to really have present Christ, that is the truth. We need to participate of Christ in all sense, with special three ways: with the testimony of the life, with communicate the truth to the other, veracity, and also with do the justice with the other, the truth of the good of the other people, and in the end to be open to the message of Christ, that is the other life. To be happy in this life, we need to think about the other life. We don't speak more about this. We don't speak more about the spirit. We don't speak more about soul. These are very important things. And we need to participate of the grace of Christ. Christ has the grace capital to diffuse in other people, to diffuse in the church. The church has the sacrament to do this, but the society need to communicate this grace to realize the fraternity that won Pope Francis. Thank you. In the contrary, if we don't come back to Christ, we don't have truth, we don't have good, we don't have common good, we don't have justice. And the problem today is that the Christianity, as Saint John Paul II, have a silent apostasy. Sorry, but this is the question.
I think the other part of what you said is really interesting about how to give voice to the voiceless. And that's something that within my small field on deliberation, we've been thinking about an awful lot more. So we've been thinking about how do you include the voices of children, but how do you also try to include the voices of unborn generations? How do you make sure you have the voices of the homeless or of refugees or of migrants? And there's lots of different ways of trying to do this, but it's very much where people are now. So I think when we're thinking here about how to interact with this post-truth world and what we can do, I think that should be a central question. And it is, you know, we need to give voice and action and reality to the voiceless. We need to think about including children, unborn, especially with the climate challenge. Unborn generations are, you know, hugely important, as well as, of course, all of the people who generally don't have voice. So I think it'd be useful to reflect on that.
I wanted to bring us back to something that we started with, which I want to make sure that we don't lose sight of. Post-truth is about political power. Post-truth is about someone being able to say, I am more powerful than the truth. I don't care what reality says. What I say is what's true. They're not trying to convince someone that they're right. They're trying to impose their views on others. As I said, I define post-truth as the political subordination of reality. In that way, I think it's the very opposite of science, where we have the humility to say, I could be wrong. Who am I to know in my gut what's true? I'll consult observation. I'll make an experiment. I'll give a hypothesis, make a prediction, test it. And maybe I'm still wrong because my colleagues are the ones who will check it. So it's hubris that bothers me. It's the idea that truth cares at all who we are. There's a truth about reality, whether we know it or not. And for someone to pretend, or I should say to have the pretense or the hubris to think that they know it and can change it is, I think, the danger. Because the truth is the truth, but it's when, what bothers me most, I guess, is the people in political power, because they're not voiceless. They have a tremendous voice. In fact, a voice so strong that they can sometimes get the voiceless to forget that they have senses and that they can learn for themselves and that truth is truth, and think that the only way that they can know the truth is from the person who's in power. That's a big problem. That undermines not only truth, it undermines community, and it undermines democratic values.
Thank you. Now, since we are approaching the end of our workshop, let me draw your attention on the following fact. The concept note of this workshop did not include the so-called economic dimension. It is impossible to do everything. But I cannot resist the temptation to underline that a major impact of fake truth in the world of today means in the last 30, 40 years, is that it is a major contributor to the increments of inequalities. I don't understand why people do not focus on that. In other words, why in the last 40 years, inequalities, in particular economic and social inequality, has increased as much as in the previous 200 years. This is, take the book by Branko Milanovic, the elephant curve, etc., etc. This is documented by objective facts or statistical fact. It seems to me that what is gaining ground is the idea, according to which, if there are inequalities, it's because those lagging behind, it's their fault. What is the notion which conveys this idea? Meritocracy. So if you are poor or if you are lagging behind, it's your fault, because the success is linked to the merit. And the merit is considered as a sort of justification of the status quo, etc. Now, that is a fake truth, but this is scientifically, from an economic point of view, fair. All serious economists all over the world, in spite of the fact that they are liberal or, let's say, social democrats, etc., agree on that. Still, the vast majority of people believe that. You read in the newspaper, we have to introduce the meritocratic rule. It was, as you know, a recent book by the American philosopher, whom you know certainly, who exactly wrote a book against meritocracy. And that is a typical example of a fake truth. By the way, that is the reason why poor Pope Francis, he keeps on talking about that. And very few people listen to him. Take another example. The problem, the so-called the famous expression, a rising tide lifts all the boats, trickle-down effect. Now, we know that the trickle-down effect is a lie, but scientific, but people keep on preaching it. And in fact, believe me that the trickle-down has become trickle-up, not trickle-down. In other words, the resources of those in the bottom go to the top and not vice versa, etc. Still, in many textbooks, in many documents, people keep on talking about the trickle-down effect. So, and I could continue. What really, sometimes I'm a bit ashamed, because you see, people do not realize that fake truth had major impacts, not only in abstract terms, but in actualities. And well, the example of the pandemic is a typical example. I was mentioning yesterday that we are facing is a syndemic, not a pandemic, properly speaking, etc. So that is why perhaps we need to follow a sort of an intersectional approach, as it has been named in recent times, between different strands. Because if we consider the post-truth phenomena and we isolate the sociological dimension, the philosophical, the economic, we will never get rid or getting out. We need perhaps to cross the border, because, and finally, consider again the risk to democracy of the so-called ochlocracy. You know this new name, ochlocracy, which means the mob rule. The mob rule in Greek is ochlocracy, which is the power to the masses, not to the people, but to the masses. And that is beloved by the various type of populism, etc. So perhaps looking into the future, we would need to increase this intersectoriality, because certain aspects are more clear to those who come from a certain scientific perspective, other aspects from other perspectives, and that might be perhaps something that we can put in the final statement. Thank you.
Anyone else? So we do have a half hour to discuss the final statement, but before we do, I wanted to say thank you to Minister Cartabia for joining us. You are welcome to stay for that if you want, but I wanted to give her a round of applause.